through. And we are live.
Thank you. All right. Welcome everyone to the March 3rd, 2022 meeting of the Longmont Historic Preservation Commission. Ms. Yost, would you call roll for us, please?
Chairman Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Hardees.
Here.
Commissioner Gayu. Oh, she's not here. Commissioner Norton.
Here.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here.
And Councilmember Rodriguez didn't join us. Okay. Great.
But we have established that we do in fact have a quorum, and so we can move forward. All right, our first agenda item is approval of our February 2022 meeting minutes. Do any of the commissioners have any questions, comments, or corrections on those minutes?
I do not, but my name wasn't called in this roll call, just so I want to be clear that I'm here. Thanks.
Commissioner Goon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks. Okay.
I apologize.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and if there are no corrections, I'd certainly entertain a motion.
Motion to approve minutes.
Yep.
Second.
All right, so I got a motion to approve from Commissioner Jacoby and a second from Commissioner Goon. And again, with this system, we're going to roll call vote. So, all right.
Chairman Lane.
I'll approve.
Commissioner Hardees.
Yes.
Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
Commissioner Goon.
Yes.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so the minutes are approved unanimously. All right, then we move on to report from the chair, which is my time to note to anyone who might be on this call that would like to speak on something that's not on the agenda during our public invited to be heard, since we don't actually have any public meeting. Once that time comes up, you'll see this new revised fancy screen on your feed. Please call in using the number noted, the meeting ID. You'll be called upon once we come back live based on your phone number. And when you do, if you could turn off your live stream, and we'll have 3 minutes for each speaker to hear your comments, which will be up shortly. Thank you. Okay, and then communications from Hpc Staff Liaison. Mr. Schumacher, do you have anything for us?
Hey, commissioners, good afternoon. Brian Schumacher with City Planning staff. I hope everybody's doing well. Just a few items of note. I'll be passing along some information to the commission regarding some upcoming training webinars that History Colorado is hosting. There's one this month, middle of the month on March 16th, regarding evaluating integrity in historic districts. So it's a webinar through Zoom that you can participate in. There's also one in April regarding preservation loans. And then also another one in May regarding disaster management planning in historic districts. So certainly encourage any of you who are interested in any of these topics to register for those Zoom webinars and participate in those. I think they're free. So as far as I know, through History Colorado. So a good training opportunity for the commission if you're all interested. And then trying to think if there's anything else. Last month, Glenn mentioned about council's interest in having the commissions, boards and commissions participate in interviews for applicants for the commissions and boards. And so we'll be providing some additional information to the HPC regarding that process. I don't know if we'll be starting that in the next couple of months or not, but after I get a chance to chat with our city managers and clerk's office staff. We'll give you more information about that. I think the game plan would be to have a couple of volunteers from each of the board and commissions to participate with the staff liaisons in interviewing those applicants whenever those come through. So just a heads up on that. And I don't know if you have any initial questions regarding that at this point in time.
Yeah, Commissioner Goon?
Yeah, I was wondering have they discussed any fears that, boards and commissions might become more uniform versus more diverse? I know that's diversity is one of the things that they've talked about within the city council, and I'm curious if that's a potential problem that they see, that you might like.
Oh, I certainly understand. And I know that's been discussed. And I think that's something that, as a board and commission, as we, go through this process of interviewing potential candidates, I think that's something we need to take into consideration in terms of the community goals regarding equity and diversity in our boards and commissions. So that's certainly a good point.
Do they have thoughts on how to make certain it doesn't happen? I mean,
well,
I don't know how you stop it really without taking you've got the commission or board, and then without taking those people out of it, I'm not sure how you stop it.
Well, for this commission in particular, there's specific CLG, certified local government requirements in terms of quality. A certain number of the board members need to have qualifications. So, I'll check in with our team that's been kind of working on this with city council. I know that the city manager and some of the other staff have been having discussions about this, because this came up with, I think it was initiated by Councilmember Waters in terms of the interest in having the boards participate in these interviews, discussions. So I'll check in with our team on that and see if they've had some discussions and guidance on that particular matter.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yep. I guess a follow-up on that might be, are the board members, if they're coming into the interview, are they there to interview and discuss, but not voting members of, are the council the only ones that make the decision? Versus, I could see it even being worse if if anybody on the commission could vote on who came in versus just having a discussion. If you have a discussion about the kind of things that happen, maybe there's some value in that. If you could vote on who comes in, I could see that spiraling probably quicker in some cases.
Yeah, I think the intent is for the boards and commissions to make recommendations, and I've obviously ultimately city council has the final to say on making the appointments, but I think they wanted to get some input, because in the past, it was strictly just city council having the interviews and making a determination on who gets appointed to the various boards and commissions. And I think they want to kind of expand that input from each of the individual boards and commissions and staff liaisons to just kind of get some additional feedback on these various candidates.
All right, great. Thanks, Brian. Any other questions at this time? No? Okay.
And aside from that, I don't think that I have anything else at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. All right, we'll close the HPC staff communications segment and move into public invited to be heard. So if there is anyone out on the call, this is your opportunity to dial in. And we'll take a 5-minute break here while we take a look to see if there is anyone out there. So we can all mute and go dark, and we'll be back in 5. Thank you.
interviews and making a determination.
Chair and Commission, we are approaching the 5-minute mark. We currently do have one caller waiting. Once I see you guys and we hit the 5-minute mark, I will drop our slide and let you know if there are any others.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we're at the 5-minute mark. Just one caller, it seems.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and open that public invited to be heard and invite that caller in for comments.
Absolutely. Okay, caller with the last 3 digits 414. Caller 414, please hit *6 to unmute yourself. Make sure you have the live stream muted in the background, and please state your name and address for the record, please. Hey there, can you hear us?
I can.
Great, we can hear you. Go ahead.
This is Sharon O'Leary, 534 Emory Street. Good evening, Historic Preservation Commission. Boards and commissions are designed to give citizens a voice in their government and provide means of influencing decisions that shape the quality of life for those citizens. The use of boards and commissions provide advantages, such as providing in-depth examinations of issues or a communication channel between elected officials and the community, and bringing a broad range of ideas or expertise into the public decision-making process and assisting the resolution of conflicts and providing training for new leaders. Well, according to Longmont's website, the purpose of the Historic Preservation Commission is to protect, enhance, preserve properties of historic, geographic, or architectural significance located within the city and the city planning area. It would appear to me that you would meet and work regularly on protecting and enhancing, even when there's not an application on your agenda. And quite possibly, if there is an application on your agenda and the meeting doesn't go the full time, you could continue to work on those sort of things afterwards if time allowed. I think it's important that you preserve Longmont before it can't be preserved. I would like to send to Brian to send out to you some documents called Taming the Teardown. It works great with Longmont's sustainability plan. As you wrestle with coming up with some preservation ideas for the east and west side, let me remind you that for 30 years, the east side has been preserved with our RLE zoning, and it's only the last 2 years that we've lost that. So if you work with the city on trying to, city planners on coming up with zoning, we would love to have our RLE back, but just remember, we're 30 years ahead of the west side. Please, please, please preserve Longmont before we're exploited. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. We appreciate you joining in. Okay, that being the only caller, I'll go ahead and close the public invited to be heard segment, and we'll move on to the other items on our agenda. Prior business, we have none. And for new business, we have approval of our annual retreat from a year ago. It looks like, I guess, that we never did get approval of. I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. Do we have a quorum?
Chairman Lane?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we ran across these meeting minutes a little while ago, last month, and noticed they were still in draft form. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to bring these to the commission, because I don't believe the commission has reviewed these in previous meetings. And I believe most of the members who participated in the retreat are here this evening. So I think there'd be enough commission members who participated in the retreat to vote to take action on the minutes this evening.
Okay, great. I was just going to I just saw that on my agenda for the first time, but I think, yeah, we do have four. Myself and Commissioner Goons-Hardy and Norton were all there. And then I think that's the lesser of the two scopes that we're looking to do here. That just
Right.
gets our full, that just documents that meeting more formally. And then I think the real meat of this is to actually have a discussion. As our caller here earlier noted, we are actually having a meeting despite the fact that there are no other agenda items on called for. So rather than cancel, we are having this exact discussion. So hopefully that helps people understand that we are trying to do things a little more, be a little more proactive, I guess is the way to say that. All right, well, let me back up just to approval of the meeting minutes. So we do have this retreat minutes from March 10th, 2021. We do have enough commissioners who were present at that meeting. Among those, is there anyone who has any questions or comments on those meeting minutes? Obviously, they were in the packet, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to at least skim through them.
So there weren't a lot of, specifics, just kind of the big picture of what we talked about. Is that what I'm getting? Is that what?
That was my impression. It was kind
Yeah.
of a series of kind of overviews of the items that we talked about, not necessarily a lot of the detail of the back and forth.
Yeah. That being the case, I mean, the minutes look fine to me. I remember talking about most all of this stuff.
I didn't see anything to object to or try to correct.
Okay, well then, again, this is really, I think, more of a formality to get this document in a non-draft form recorded, and it was good to have today to just review, so, at least as an overview, what we discussed. So can I get a motion to approve from?
I would move that we approve. There we go.
A second.
Okay, all right, I'll get a motion to approve the minutes from March 10th. Motion approved from Commissioner Goon, second by Commissioner Hardees. Maria, can you call the roll for us?
Chairman Lane,
Yes, approved.
Commissioner Hardees,
Yes.
Commissioner Norton,
Yes.
Commissioner Goon,
Yes.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Abstain.
Okay, great. So the minutes are approved with one abstention. And let's then roll into part B of this, which is really building on those. And I particularly found useful as a summary, Brian's staff report at the end there, the kind of 2-pager that just, kind of outlined, restated in summary, some of those items. But at any rate, what we're really trying to do here is talk through some priorities and action items for the year. Brian, did you have anything you wanted to discuss to start with, or is this just kind of an open forum for us as the commission?
I think it's more intended to be an open discussion by the commission. We just kind of, obviously it's been a while since it's been a year since the retreat. So we thought it'd be worthwhile to bring this back, refresh the commission's memory about what you guys discussed a year ago. Just open it up and see if what the kind of the priorities that were listed in the minutes, as well as those action items, are still relevant and the priority for the commission. I know a lot of those items weren't accomplished, and so we wanted to see what opportunities there might be for kind of moving some of these items forward, as noted in the staff report and mentioned at last month's meeting. We have hired an outside consultant to help us with the preservation code update, and that's in process. And we will certainly bring forward, as soon as it's ready and available, a draft of that for the commission to review and provide input on.
Do you have any kind of timeline on that? Like, any idea whether that might be another, like, next month or longer than that, or?
Well, we're having a internal discussion about whether or not we need to take some of the kind of policy discussions up to city council first for discussion, get some just guidance before we come back to the commission for additional details and input on the draft. But Glenn's been out of the office for a few weeks, so I just need to check in with him because he's been coordinating with the consultant as of late. So he may have some more updates next week when he's back in the office. So we can provide, I think we're hoping to have at least a preliminary draft for staff to review, maybe sometime later this month. And then we can kind of figure out, after we get a chance to take a look at that, kind of what that time frame is for getting that to the commission for review and discussion.
Yeah, I would think if we can just, even if by next meeting, we can have a goal to have a timeline.
Oh, sure.
I
think that's certainly reasonable.
Okay, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal when Glenn presented this to city council last fall was to try to have the code amendments wrapped up in quarter. Now, whether or not that's realistic, I'm not sure, but that's certainly a target that we're shooting for. Okay, great. Thanks. Well, let's just go. Maybe we don't have to go in any kind of order, but since we're on the
sounds
topic
like
Commissioner Norton may have a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, thanks. I appreciate that.
no,
I don't
thank
see the
you.
little hand there so well.
I just wanted some clarification on what it is the consultant is working on. So my recollection is that in our retreat last year, we got through about half of the zoning codes that we had wanted to get through, and we had discussed reconvening after those had been approved or vetted by the city attorneys. So are they only looking at what we have already discussed, or are they taking a much broader view on this draft that you guys have hired them for?
So again, I believe they are looking at the entire draft that I think the commission looked at a preliminary red line draft at your retreat last March. I know that Jade had been working with our former assistant city attorney on this. She's no longer with the city staff. And so I know that Glenn has been working with our outside consultant to come up with a comprehensive draft of all of the entire document, the entire preservation code. And so that's my understanding of what the plan is that we're going to be looking at this on a kind of a comprehensive basis. And then I think, as I mentioned earlier, there's a few policy discussion items that we need to have with city council, and I don't know if that will happen before we bring the draft to the HPC or after. So I just need to, like I said, I need to check in with Glenn and see what kind of that game plan is on that. And we can talk about that some more maybe at next month's meeting.
Okay, thank you. And then also then if we have this outside consultant who's working on a more comprehensive draft beyond what the commission has discussed, what's our role when we read the draft? Will we be simply advisory? Are we going to have a greater role in kind of vetting what these outside consultants have are proposing for our code? Or like has that been discussed internally about how we relate to these consultants?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think the intent is for, obviously staff hasn't seen a draft from the consultants either. So I think the initial step was that we'd get a draft from the consultants, staff would review that, provide some initial feedback to the consultants, at least preliminarily. And then, like I said, I'm not sure on the sequence in terms of some of these policy questions, whether that comes to the commission first to make a recommendation to city council, or if we go to city council just to get some general guidance first before we bring the draft back to the commission for review. Ultimately, we would expect the commission to provide recommendations on the drafts back to staff and the outside consultant before we start drafting an ordinance for council's consideration.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's just keep the topic to the code, this code piece for just a minute, and then we can be a little more, assured about as we go through each kind of piece if we can. So are there any other questions or comments that would just be specific to the code update?
Yeah, so I think I noted this in the brief staff communication that we did share these minutes from the retreat. I know because there was quite a bit of discussion by the commission on some of the topics related to the preservation code. And so they have that information. They have some information based on some of the discussions that Jade had with the city attorney's office. So they're utilizing that information as they draft this preliminary draft of the code update.
Okay. I had one thing that came out of, so I attended one day of the preservation conference, and there was a session, and I don't actually remember what the session was. I saved one note from it that was pretty interesting. They were talking about demolition ordinances, and specifically deconstruction ordinances associated with demolition, which I found kind of fascinating because what I think this was the city of Portland, so obviously a bigger municipality, but what they did is they added, if a property is if there's a property that does get approved to be demolished or partly demolished, it is still a requirement to deconstruct. So full-on demolition is not allowed for any kind of, if it falls within that kind of 50-year period or whatever. I mean, it's part of the ordinance, so that the materials must be deconstructed and either brought to an architectural salvage yard, so they might be reused in some other project. And what they found is that was actually a little bit, it was yet another hurdle to demolition, which reduced the number of demolition applications, because people thought that, well, if I got to go through all this deconstruction, maybe it's not worth it, and maybe I should just figure out a way to save it. And so it had kind of a two-sided benefit, if I'm remembering this right, where it actually helped reduce demolition, and even when a demolition went through, it required the property owner to take the materials and source them somewhere so that those materials could actually live on somewhere else. I thought that was amazing. I thought it was really cool. And so I'm kind of interested in what everyone else on the commission thinks about that, and whether that might be something we could try to, suggest. Yeah, Commissioner Hardees.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. And that, even if not for supporting the preservation goals, it's a really good tool for sustainability in almost every other way. So, for whichever purpose or both, I think we should support that.
And I recall, and obviously sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the discussion, but I do recall in at least an earlier draft that I had seen in the preservation code, that in the demolition section, and I don't know if this is in the most current draft that Jade had discussed with the city attorney's office, but we had added in some wording about having requirements if a property, as you mentioned, Commissioner Lane, about if the property were to be demolished, either partially or completely, that there would be some potential requirements for salvage, reuse, recycling of those materials. And similar to your experience in that session on Portland, I remember seeing a webinar regarding a program that's in the city of Baltimore, where they do very similar things in terms of, I think there's a startup company called Bricks and Boards, where they employ individuals in Baltimore to do these deconstruction projects, and it was very interesting. I could certainly forward that information onto the commission if you'd be interested in hearing or watching that webinar.
Yeah, I think so. Commissioner
Jennifer, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually at that same session, and it was, I agree, it was definitely a very fantastic, I mean, it was a really cool idea. I've never seen it codified such. I do know in a lot of other cities, there are kind of salvage businesses that work with demolition companies, but if this were a way to make it, cleaner in terms of ensuring that as much of the building were salvaged and reused as possible. But I also do like the idea too, that it's it's a little bit of a stick against demolition. So it's definitely, it was a really, really interesting session.
Good. Well, so I remembered it mostly correctly.
You remembered it correctly, yes.
I always like to hear that. Commissioner Goon, did you have a comment?
I did not make it this year to the conference, but I found it, I like the idea of incentives more than the sticks, the carrots over the sticks, especially when you're talking about these properties. I think you get better goodwill, and you are less likely to get secondary problems down the line as people maybe choose then not to demolish something that maybe should be, and maybe you end up with that demolition by neglect over time. So certainly if it's a designated historic home, everybody knows that there's certain rules to that, but I know that when we were talking last year at the retreat, we were talking about, more homes than just the designated properties. So adding more regulations to what they can and can't do is not, I prefer the incentives, versus the regulations.
Thanks, that's fair. Any other, Commissioner Hardy?
Well, just to add on to that, I agree. You don't want to overburden people with, regulation, frustrate, but the entire building code, and companion codes are that kind of regulation. And I think they're appropriate tools to make sure we're building responsibly, even building for deconstruction in the future, so that you're not relying on construction adhesives everywhere, which make it almost impossible to separate floor joists from sheathing and paneling from drywall, all those things that when you demolish a building built in the last 30 years, it comes apart in giant chunks because everything's glued together and screws are harder to get out than nails, and part of that's just technology. But I think that the codes and the issue around deconstruction is another area where we can all be better educated to try to make it more feasible to deconstruct in the future.
Right.
And I don't disagree.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I don't disagree. I just think that you can also overburden with codes, and then you've got higher prices at a time when people are looking for affordableness as well. So there's always a balance, and so we just definitely need to be careful with that. And historic homes, ones that are designated, we want more designated, not less. And so if you make it more difficult to have a designated historic home, then that disincentivizes that too. So it's like I said, it's always a balance. So you just have to be careful with that kind of thing.
And perhaps there's a way to build some incentives into that require, whether it's a requirement or if you do it, your permit fees or the demolition fee is waived, or some, I don't know. I mean, thinking we can talk about different things that you get as a bonus if you follow the program, can also be a way to kind of incentivize it. Also, it might be the incentive to salvage materials because a 2x4 costs $172. All right.
Certainly getting closer to that amount.
All right. Any other comments on code ideas? And then if there aren't any, then I'll just open it up to whoever wants to, whatever subject we want to move on to next. All right.
You know what? I will comment. It is, Brian, it is frustrating to hear about this pushback over. It's been a year that we've been waiting on the red lines, the codes, and we meet every month, and it'll be great if you can mark your calendar to be sure to ask, what's going on, so we have the answer next month. Because it feels like we were told that was going to happen this month. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm forgetting. But it is frustrating to keep having this, and obviously I think it's frustrating for Sharon O'Leary, our call-in person that calls regularly as well. So whatever you can do, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Well, again, I'm just taking a look at this staff report and kind of priorities. We had additional educational resources, historic districts recognized locally, expansion of those districts, additional surveys, a whole bunch of stuff around the preservation plan. I'm kind of interested, just local design guidelines. I know that's been a topic of discussion. So curious what, as commissioners, are the passion, the number two, what might be the number two priority. A preservation plan seems like something we would be really, potentially valuable, but I don't know what it takes to get that.
Yeah, so just a quick injection. After the tonight's discussion and the commission's acknowledgements regarding what they'd like to see happen, at least in the near term. Obviously, this is a pretty large list in terms of priorities, and obviously we need to prioritize those priorities probably in terms of what staff and outside consultants can accomplish. But staff will be meeting in the next week or so to kind of talk about the HPC priorities and action items and getting those moving forward. We do have some funding budgeted this year for at least some of the work. And I know we've talked about the neighborhood design guidelines, and I know that's been a priority for the historic East Side neighborhood as well. We've talked about potentially some additional survey work. We've also talked about potentially this preservation plan, but I think what we'd want to do is kind of look at grant funding opportunities, whether that's the State Historic Fund grant. I know there's also opportunities potentially for a CLG, Certified Local Government grant, and I think those are offered maybe once a year. So we can look at different grant funding opportunities to maybe leverage what funding we do have available to kind of provide potential additional opportunities to move things forward potentially quicker than what we've seen in the past. So obviously, I know the commission and the public are anxious to get things moving forward. And so certainly appreciate of kind of the list that was identified as priorities and action items. What do you think are the, maybe the top 3 or 4 that you think would be most important for us to perhaps focus on in the next year or two?
Any thoughts? Yeah, Commissioner Jacoby.
Looking at these all worthy goals, I think the local level design guidelines should be a higher priority. And as you mentioned, Brian, there's been some grassroots push from folks in the historic East Side. I know you've received a lot of information I think it was Bob McLaughlin has been working on this quite a bit. And there's been a lot of thought put into it already. I don't think it would take a lot of time beyond that. It will take some, obviously, but I think some of the work has already been done. And I think that with the development pressure within the historic districts and without, that I think that should be a high priority on this list.
Okay.
Other commissioners, you want to comment on Commissioner Norton?
I think that we've brought up potential grant funding in the past. And I would just like to recommend that maybe staff gets familiar with what that calendar is. There's, 2 different cycles each year for State Historic Fund, although they're for different types of funding levels, so different kind of scopes of projects. And we did just miss the CLG for this year. Those are usually due in January or very beginning of February, if I'm remembering correctly. I just remember we did try to go for a CLG grant. I guess it would have been 2020s. And because we only meet once a month, that time goes away quickly. And so I think we had kind of a difficult time as a commission and with our staff member who has limited time to dedicate to us to kind of get everything together and our ideas and our goals and our thoughts to make a really good application. And so we didn't get it that year. So just so we can plan, like kind of think further out than our monthly meetings and get a calendar going for when we need to have these ideas set.
Because my understanding is, in terms of the State Historic Fund, that there's two opportunities. Isn't it typically April and October, perhaps, that are grant funding opportunities?
Yeah, and they just recently changed, and so it might be August now instead of October. I can double check
Okay.
on that for you, but they just changed that a little bit last year. And I think that they changed it to August and February because we just had the mini grant round closed a few weeks ago. So
I think we just got notice for kind of this next round that just opened up in maybe the first of this month for, I think the deadline is perhaps mid to late April application deadline. Jennifer, do you recall on that?
I want to say late April, early May, but I cannot recall, but I will definitely go back and check my emails for that.
Okay.
And what other
That-
sources might be available for funding a preservation plan? I mean, the city's obviously doing a lot of different things. There's Steam and Sugar Beet, and there's been the Main Street corridor, and so where are other potential sources that we could get funding to actually make that happen?
Well, I know the State Historic Fund and the CLG grants I think they both require, or at least the State Historic Fund requires a matching grant or matching funds to go with the grant application. I think the CLG is recommended, maybe not required necessarily. So we could certainly utilize some of the budgeted funds that we have in the city budget to perhaps use that as matching funds to leverage those grant applications to maybe extend our opportunities for additional work, whether that's survey work, a preservation plan, or hiring an outside consultant to do some of this additional work, as opposed to with staff's limited time availability to work on these different projects. I think that's probably more beneficial. I think the last State Historic Fund grant and CLG grant that I worked on a number of years ago was to hire a consultant to work on the downtown historic district on the National Register, which got approved in I believe 2017 or so. So, I mean, I think that was a successful example of kind of leveraging the city's time and budget availability of budget to apply for these grants to get different things done in a more timely fashion.
Yeah, I think that's great. Commissioner Norton, I'll call on you in just a second. I did call up, as I just got an email from somebody at the SHF a few days ago, so I have it here. The grant deadline is May 1st for requests up to 50,000 and August 1st for requests up to 250,000. But they're actually talking about maybe shifting that August 1st by a month to September. So the larger grant is a little bit later, the smaller grant is sooner. So I think we ought to, making a priority to at least find some funding to put this on our radar, I think would be an important piece for us. Commissioner Norton, what do you have for comments?
Just to answer your question, and I know that even looking for grants can sometimes feel like or be a full-time job, but I wonder if there's like the National Association of Certified Local Governments, which I know is not exactly the name, but it's something along that, NACP or something. I don't know if they have grants. National Park Service sometimes has grants that local communities can go for, and maybe like the National Trust, so maybe we can look outside of the state, because I know SHF and CLG, those are competitive, and not everybody who applies gets funded. Not that we wouldn't have a really good shot, but looking elsewhere might be beneficial for us as well.
Yeah, we did get some information from Lindsay, who's the CLG coordinator out at History Colorado, regarding a few grant opportunities, but the deadline was coming up pretty quick. So those probably wouldn't work for us, but we can certainly explore some different options that might be available.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff comes up every year, and years go by fast. So if we just keep in mind, in February, X things coming up, maybe in the fall, we can get our act together as a commission and decide if we can try to apply for those funds.
Sure.
And don't we have as a commission something like $15,000 banked? Did I remember hearing that?
I think that's right. I mean, I think the applications that the commission review, the state tax credit, residential tax credit applications, there's a application fee associated with those, and those go into, I believe it's called Historic Preservation Fund here at the city, since we are reviewing those as a CLG. And so I think you're right, Commissioner Goon, that there is approximately about $15,000 in that fund based on the application fees that we've received over the past few years. So.
And we have in the past at least talked about, as a commission, using some of that money for some of these other smaller priorities, like additional educational resources, developing something like that, or additional data collection, taking a look at the surveys that we've had done in different areas and trying to expand to find other properties. But yeah, nothing's really come of it. But those are two items that I remember were discussed about with respect to that fund.
At the retreat, there was in the minutes, there was reference to maybe coordinating with UC Colorado at Denver or UC Colorado Boulder, or whatever higher education opportunities there might be that students might be interested in doing whatever work as part of a class project and or individual projects or research. So there might be some opportunities there. And I don't know if the commission wants to kind of talk about that a little bit more. I didn't participate in the retreat, so I don't know the full breadth of that discussion that happened last March. So.
Anybody want to comment on that? I think that's where I think maybe having Commissioner Carpenter here would have been good. I think that might have been her suggestion, because I think she came out of I don't remember which, but one of the UC programs. So I think she was talking about that possibility. Curious, what other commissioners might think about the local level design guidelines and prior, what kind of priority that would be, what the scope of that might be. Just open that discussion up a little more. Yeah, Commissioner Hardees.
It seems like, much of the concern out there is for the immediacy of the problem of losing our historic fabric, unless something changes soon. So I'd say any of these that can slow that trend, whether it's expanding local historic districts to apply some standards to, homes and other buildings that aren't protected right now, or certainly the design guidelines could incorporate some of that protection, but short of a moratorium on demolition of some kind, I think we have to focus on those things that can produce quicker results to slow that.
Any other comments on guidelines?
Certainly the guidelines make sense, definitely, as far as a priority is concerned. I believe we talked last March about having a real equitable survey of residents to see what it is that they want to see, how much government oversight do they want to see on their own homes as far as historic homes are concerned? Because they were, talking about 50-year-old homes or 30-year-old homes and where that line would lay and, that sort of thing. So that was part of the reason for the survey is because I know we discussed, we don't really know. We know what the people who are interested in historic buildings want to see, definitely, but as far as the community as a whole, it's less clear.
So I wonder if that's not an opportunity to use some of those funds that we're talking about. If we could come up with, I don't know what this would take and how much staff time this would take, but if we could come up with a short survey and get it out to people in the neighborhoods, really it comes down to east side, west side, right? I mean, those are the only places where this guideline could theoretically even be enforced. But and I obviously don't know what kind of percentage response we get, but short of just publishing it on the city's website and saying we're going to talk about it next week, come down or call in and give us your feedback. Brian, are there any simple ways to do that are relatively economical that you're aware of, or?
Yeah, there probably is. I need to maybe reach out to our staff and our information team about what opportunities there might be and what's kind of the best way to do that community outreach. I know we've done a bunch of surveys in the past on a variety of different topics. And so, I know there are ways to accomplish that without just posting it as a agenda item for getting feedback at a meeting. And so, when Glenn's back next week, I'll add that to the list of discussion topics and then incorporate, because last month's meeting, I just wanted to mention, Aaron, who presented on the steam and the sugar mill sub-area plan, we've done certainly some community outreach regarding that particular project to get feedback. And I don't know if any of the commission were able to participate in that community event last night, but so there's definitely a way to get to that and get some feedback from the neighborhood. And the neighborhood groups may even have mailing lists that I could reach out to the historic east side and west side neighborhoods to see what connections they have, what methods do they use to get the word out to their neighborhood groups. And so, if there's an interest in doing some type of survey regarding, preservation priorities or level of regulation on certain things such as neighborhood design guidelines or the preservation code, we can certainly talk about that.
Okay, great. Commissioner Jacoby.
I just want to make sure that if there is an outreach to the neighbors, last meeting, Glenn mentioned that he was focusing mostly on the historic districts. On the east side, the historic districts are 4.5 blocks, but the historic east side neighborhood is 30 blocks. The RLE1 zoning that we were all under for 30 years, which had design guidelines, was for the full 30 blocks. And I want to make sure that when we pursue this, that we look at the full 30 block area from 3rd to 9th and from Martin to Kimbark, not just the 4.5 blocks of the historic district, which is really quite minute.
No, I appreciate that. And I understand that the desire of particularly the historic east side neighborhood is to look at the more comprehensive view in terms of the entire neighborhood as opposed to just the National Historic District, which was, I think that was created back in the mid 80s. And it is fairly limited in terms of scope and area. And so, I'll certainly convey that to our team in terms of the interest on the part of, the neighborhood, and I'm assuming the commission as well, so.
So what would be the recommended step? I mean, unless there's something else that's really burning a hole in anybody, it seems like we have, really getting more concrete on the timeline for the code updates, which at the moment is in the city's court and we're waiting on. And then the other two pieces, which would be the getting some movement on a preservation plan, which is really at this point more about figuring out how we can fund it, right? And just trying to put a little pressure on getting a plan to fund that work.
So a question I have is, as the commission, and I apologize, I haven't participated in this discussion in the past, but as the commission discussed or talked about examples of what that preservation plan might include, what the goals are in terms of the preservation plan. We could certainly come back with some examples and see if this is kind of what the commission is after in terms of a preservation plan for the community. But I'm assuming part of that discussion occurred in previous meetings and or at the retreat, but.
Right. And anybody want to jump in, feel free. I'm just trying to look for our notes.
And I can certainly go back, and it sounded like Jade had submitted an application for a grant. I just need to track that down and see what was part of that grant application. I don't know if that was discussed with the commission before that grant application was submitted, or.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, we did talk about it. Yeah.
Well, not to put everybody on the spot, I just was curious, what was discussed in the past. I can certainly pull up, try to track down that grant application, and maybe we could bring that back and just see if that was consistent or is consistent with the current thinking in terms of what the commission would like to see in terms of moving forward with, perhaps another grant application to hire a consultant to put together a preservation plan for the community.
Yeah, I mean, all I have on my notes, and it's really from this summary, are, we talked about expanding the survey of properties, right?
Okay.
And that as a baseline, right? And so that could even be a small grant funded. It can be steps, right? So we could, instead of having this massive fund a preservation plan, we could have, let's fund a survey to kind of go across the entire Longmont area, right? Not just focused on east side, west side, downtown, but, for example, this Latin property on Highway 119 that kind of came across. I mean, there's more of those, right? So surveying the entire, getting a better sense of what our assets are as historic assets are in the community could be one small piece of a grant funded base, right? And then we talked about looking at other communities' preservation plans as to start to generate ideas, and maybe that's where our next step ought to be is to say, big picture, we want to move towards a preservation plan. Let's try to explore some opportunities to fund that or at least a baseline grant of survey work. And in the meantime, let's try to find some examples of preservation plans that we can talk about and say, this is really feels like a close fit to what we're after. And that might help in the grant application and in defining some scope.
Sure. No, I think that's helpful. I appreciate that, and we can have some further discussions about that. at upcoming meetings, certainly. And if the commission would like us, we can try to do a little bit of research on what other communities have done in terms of their preservation plans as well.
Yeah. Any other commissioners have any thoughts on that? I just kind of laid that out as something to start with. Yeah, okay. And then really it's and that whole discussion may involve university connection as well. Maybe if Commissioner Carpenter's on next month, we can ask her to maybe we just kind of keep this on the agenda every meeting, and even if it's a brief update, gives us an opportunity to kind of ping people as to something like this. We can ask Commissioner Carpenter next week or next month. And then so the other big chunk would seem to be the some sort of guideline. And I'm a little unclear, and so it would be helpful to understand. So if we started as a HPC saying, well, we've heard people come in and say we want some guidelines. How much kind of authority or influence do we have to, I don't want to get to a point where we're talking about specific guideline, code language if we don't have, especially if it gets beyond the boundaries of a historic district and starts potentially applying to a property that isn't a landmark. Now without some direction that we're not wasting our time doing that, right? That seems, because that could be out of our wheelhouse, right? I mean, we're about properties in historic districts and properties that are locally landmarked. That's where we have some jurisdiction. So can we talk about how, we start talking about guidelines that affect other properties? How are we wading into waters that are dangerous to us?
Yeah, that's always a good question. I know that when this was discussed with City Council, I believe last fall, Glenn took up a list of different potential work plans, work items. And I know the design guidelines were one of those topics that was discussed with City Council. And I know the council discussed, different options for, the Historic Preservation Commission to play a role in terms of making recommendations regarding the creation and development of those design guidelines, but then also potentially, reviewing potential applications that come through and providing recommendations on applications. I think that's a little ways off in terms of getting some additional feedback and guidance from perhaps City Council on which way they want to go in terms of the commission's role in that end. Because, if the commission is taking on additional responsibility for reviewing applications, for example, in the historic East Side neighborhood, that's not necessarily a historic landmark or within a historic, a registered historic district, then, we need to kind of figure out, is that, going to create more of a burden for the Historic Preservation Commission, or do we need to look at different opportunities for how those design guidelines would be utilized, and who would be responsible for enforcing those, whether that's staff or another architectural review commission or board, or who that might be? Because I don't think that's been determined yet. In the past, I will say that, under the previous, what was the RLE, or residential low density established zoning that was in place in the historic East Side neighborhood, there were some guidelines in terms of kind of contextual design that was in place with that zoning. And at that time, that was something that was, staff's responsibility to review and enforce unless it was an application that required a public hearing. Then that would be presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration as part of that particular application. So, obviously there's a lot of questions to be answered as we kind of continue down this path of, how much detail is going to be in these design guidelines, who's responsible for reviewing and enforcing applications that are subject to the guidelines. So I don't have an answer for those yet, but that'll come in future meetings, certainly.
Okay, thanks. And my primary concern is just not leading this group down a path of creating something that then gets, that council turns around and says, what the heck do you think you're doing?
No, I mean, I certainly would want to get early on direction from city council that they are okay. It's kind of similar to the preservation code. We certainly want to get a policy direction from city council that they are in general agreement before we get too far down the path of, into the weeds on, the nuts and bolts of specific design guidelines.
Okay. Commissioner Norton.
I have a question that might be a little bit out of left field, but I feel like, and this is kind of related to what you were talking about, Steve, but there's other commissions who talk about things that we kind of touch on, right? So we've already, discussed sustainability issues this evening with like demolition ordinances and such. Is there an affordable housing committee? Is there, like the things that we decide here can touch on other issues that other committees are interested in? And I feel like having these conversations in a silo might not be helping our own cause in terms of caring about historic preservation, but then also what our community needs and thinking about things in a more holistic way.
That's a great question and comment. I do think that I think it makes sense that, for example, the neighborhood design guidelines, I think aside from Historic Preservation Commission and obviously City Council, which would need to adopt the guidelines, I think we'd probably be looking for feedback from Planning and Zoning Commission, because as potentially they may be involved to some extent as well. And typically code amendments that are incorporated into what's referred to as the Land Development Code, generally the council has asked the Planning and Zoning Commission to weigh in on those particular amendments. So I think there'd be kind of multiple boards and commissions involved in that, those particular amendments. I'm not sure in terms of the preservation code, whether or not anyone besides historic preservation and city council will be weighing in on those. I have to check in with our team and see if that would in fact be the case or not. The question about the deconstruction though, ordinance and with demolition, we do have a pretty robust sustainability plan, and there is a board that reviews and makes recommendations regarding that. And so I think if that were to come forward with a recommendation to incorporate either incentives or requirements regarding deconstruction, I think we probably want to run it by our sustainability staff and the boards that are involved with that as well. So I certainly appreciate and acknowledge that it's kind of a broader look than just each individual commissions. And it was interesting when I worked on the oil and gas regulations in 2012. It was a broad look, not just Plan and Zoning Commission and City Council. We had the Board of Environmental Affairs, we had Parks and Recs Advisory Board because it affected city open space parcels. So Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, that we want to get as many interested parties and boards and commissions involved in this discussion as possible.
Great, thanks. Any other comments or considerations for prioritization or anything we've talked about already?
I mean, I know there's a few other things that were noted in the kind of the list of priorities, such as create and produce additional education resources for the community. I know we're planning on working on, and Jane, I don't know if you can weigh in what the time frame is. I know we're talking about maybe doing some updates to our overall city website. And I don't know, I know that's been in discussions over the past year or so, and I don't know exactly what that time frame is, but I know Karen Bryant before Jade was working on some updates to our preservation web pages. I think Jade might have done some additional work on that, but that's kind of an ongoing process. And then just general outreach to the historic neighborhoods. I know Karen had done that a few years ago. Just generally kind of did an outreach, particularly to owners of historic properties, just to let them, remind them, because obviously over time those properties transfer hands, and some may or may not be aware of what's required in terms of a historic landmark, what opportunities there might be available in terms of tax credits. So I think that's a good opportunity to kind of continue to do that outreach on a regular basis to not only historic property owners, but just the general historic neighborhoods as well. So that I know in particular, talking with Sharon and Bob from the historic East Side neighborhood, that they've certainly done outreach with their neighborhood group to encourage property owners to consider designation of their properties as historic landmarks. So I think we can continue to look at that. And I think there was also some discussion about, the historic districts that we currently have are National Register districts. So they're more recognition districts as opposed to regulatory districts. And I believe there may have been some discussion in the past regarding whether or not we want to consider having discussions about creating local historic districts, which has more regulatory effect on those districts. That's probably a longer term discussion than perhaps what we might have for this year. Over the years, I've had discussions with members of the historic East Side neighborhood of whether or not they wanted to pursue that. We also have in our, not to be too long-winded here, but also in our current land development code, we also have another potential tool which hasn't been utilized, although we've had it on the books since 2001, is something that's referred to as a conservation overlay district. It's certainly not to the level of a local historic district, but it also provides some protections for properties within that conservation overlay district. And I know in the past, we've had some discussions with the commission about that as well, and some of the neighborhood groups. But that's another potential tool that we could also discuss at a future meeting.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And I think maybe when Karen did that, she did a mailer a few years ago that ended up bringing a few people in to, didn't realize they could get some tax dollars for some work. And so that was really good. And I'm not sure, but I think she might have dipped into that fund of ours to pay for the mailer or something like that. But
I think you may have been, I think you may be right.
Yeah, so that's a place where I think that's money could certainly, that's an example of some small gesture that was funded by that actually worked and brought some education and some advantage to the community. So.
Right, and I seem to recall, I don't know if it was Karen or Jay, they put together kind of a list of potential uses for some of that, historic fund balance. And I don't know if that was discussed with the commission at all in the past year or two. But we could try to maybe resurrect that and see if we can find that memo that they put together and come back to the commission for a discussion topic as well.
Yeah, I don't remember it being recent, but I think that'd be worthwhile.
Okay. And then I'm just kind of looking through the list here, see if there's anything else. We've talked about surveys, we've talked about education, connecting with the university, preservation plans, code updates, historic districts, we just talked about that. Web resources, I mean, that's something that we're kind of working on an ongoing basis. So yeah, seems like what I've heard tonight is that obviously the preservation code continues to be top priority. We've got the neighborhood design guidelines as a priority. We've got kind of continuing discussions about what a preservation plan would be for our community and how we want to go about maybe working towards hiring a consultant to help us work on that and look at grant opportunities to make something like that happen. And then, you know, some of the other things we can kind of work on as time and resources become available.
Yeah, it feels like you've heard that correctly from my perspective.
And then also kind of the community outreach as well is one of those topics, just to get some feedback from the community on preservation related topics.
Okay. So I guess I'd ask that we just we certainly keep meeting if we don't have any other agenda items, just so we can have a continuing discussion about these, and maybe we focus on one particular area at a given time. But also, even if we have a discussion, if we have action items, if we at least have an update, you know, on the agenda every meeting, to where we can maybe hit a couple of points. Just so we're kind of keeping tabs on this. I think that'd be good for everybody. Well, maybe not so good for staff, sorry, but.
That's fine. I'll be sure to include or invite Glenn back to the next meeting for kind of an update on where things are at with respect to the preservation code and his discussions with our outside consultant, and kind of discuss the time frame on that and kind of where things are at. And then we can also maybe do some brainstorming regarding the other items as well. Great.
All right. So before I close that, any other comments or questions from commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Goon.
Can I ask, is it August that the city budget comes out? Because that may be a place that we can all rally and suggest that, you know, some of the focus, you know, it might be there versus some other areas. Is it August?
Well, that's when we start the process with city council, having those discussions late August, early September, but we actually start the annual budget process. It's coming up in April and May, where staff is starting to have those conversations and what those priorities are. And so I think, you know, I'll have to check in with Glenn in terms of what our current funding budget is for some of this preservation work, and maybe we can have that conversation at next month's meeting.
Okay. What
opportunities there may be for requesting at least the same amount that we have this year, or potentially additional funding amount. I don't know personally. I don't know what that amount is for this year, so I just need to check in with Glenn on what that is.
Well, I mean, like Holly was talking about all of the priorities there's so many priorities, and I know that city staff has been, you know, there's been changeover and changes. So,
right.
You know, maybe anyway, thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, we want to get the recommendations or requests in either in, I think it's usually late April, early May for budget requests that go up to the city manager's office. So we do need to start that process early if we're going to be asking for certain things for additional funding for preservation work. So.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Commissioner Hardees.
I just wanted to ask if any of us come across good examples of preservation plans for other communities. Would it be good for us to send a copy of those directly to you, Brian, or through Steve, or?
Yeah, you can certainly correspond with me and Jennifer. That'd be great, and or Glenn, and just if you have any examples, and Steve, the example you gave of Portland about the deconstruction stuff, I mean that's helpful information. We can certainly, and I don't recall if, those sessions on the Saving Places Conference, if there's information that's still available from those sessions that could be dispersed to the commission, or I don't know how exactly what the kind of the outcome of those virtual.
Right. I think they're supposed to be recorded. I'll see if I can't log back in and find the recording of that session.
Okay.
I'll see if I can do that.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to share some of that information to the commission, other commissioners, if they're interested in hearing about that.
Sure. Okay. Any other commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Jacoby.
On a totally different topic, but you mentioned earlier this Latin property, and I just want to give a little update on that because I did a little footwork after our last meeting when I heard that P&Z had approved or recommended the change in zoning. They made the recommendation contingent on some form of agreement with Historic Preservation Commission. That was their recommendation. But I went to David Bell, the Director of Parks and Open Space, and said, look, have you, that the owners of the property said that they approached the city and offered the buildings. Have you heard of this? And in fact, he only heard of it in a peripheral sense. He didn't know any of the historic significance of the buildings. And we talked about it. He did express some interest with a lot of trepidation because, old buildings can be money pits, and, does it fit in the budget of Parks and Rec? But it is on, it's adjacent to open space property. It's adjacent to a city park, and it would make, he pointed out, it would make a great entryway into the city. As it turns out, he's not that, so far, he's not that interested in taking over the property, but I did find out again in the process of this, speaking to him and speaking to several city council members, that the barn on that property does not have to be raised in order to put in the gas station and the 7-Eleven and the taco shop. And it's not, the rest of the buildings would have to be removed, but the barn would not. And I did request city council, I went to public invited to be heard as just a citizen rather than, and I pointed out that I was on this commission, but I was going as a citizen, recommending that they be sure if they change the zoning to make sure it's contingent on agreement, some form of agreement with the Historic Preservation Commission. And that is truly what they passed. So the zoning has changed contingent on some form of agreement with the Historic Preservation Commission, and the barn might be preservable. And I think that's something I would go on record right now and say to those developers that I would like to see that barn preserved, in addition to some plaques, if they are going to go forward with zoning changes and putting in what they have. But that's what I would like to do. Some food for thought for others, but they will be coming back to us if they want to do their construction. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Interesting. Thanks for the update.
Yeah, I will confirm that as Commissioner Jacoby mentioned, that the city council did approve the rezoning, I think last month in February. They did include the condition that the Plan and Zoning Commission recommended regarding coming back to the commission and discussing with staff and the commission regarding recommendations on the kind of the plan for the balance of the site, whether that's interpretive information or, as Commissioner Jacoby mentioned, opportunities for preservation or recognition or something regarding the rest of the structure. So there will be some additional discussions on this matter at a future meeting.
Okay, thanks. Let's see if there anything else before I close this agenda item. No? Okay. All right. Well, I think that was a good discussion. Appreciate everybody's time there. We'll go ahead and close that. And then really all we have left here is just any other open comments from HPC commissioners. Are there any kind of general comments that any commissioners would like to make? No? I'll make one. So I did attend the was it yesterday? I guess it was yesterday. The Steam and Sugar Mill planning session, community forum, and it was interesting. I had a couple of different focuses, but one of them was sort of in the historic preservation lens. I was a little bummed out that we ended up kind of historic preservation sort of got layered in with this overall sustainability category, and that sounds fine, except that everybody's focus was on green gardens and solar panels and environmental sensitivity and blah, blah, and all the stuff, which is all cool. It's all great stuff to have a conversation about. But then it was like, oh, and historic preservation, and the comments just got, you know, there were, and I had not been on one of these before, but this was an online platform, so people were just typing in comments that would just sort of populate the screen like crazy, which was interesting in a way, although it was very hard to follow. And all these comments were about all this green, you know, eco-friendly construction and planning. And so I was just furiously typing historic preservation comments so that there'd be at least some record of someone there who wanted the buildings to be recognized. And there were maybe a couple others, but it was a little lesser presence than I might have otherwise liked to see. But at any rate, if any of you come across that opportunity again, maybe join on to load up a few comments, because in part that they're taking comments based on, you know, what they see as an overriding theme, right? And so if there's just one nutcase in the corner, it doesn't have as much weight.
We certainly appreciate your typing efforts, Commissioner Lang.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good session. It was really interesting to see that process. And I think it was a little more egalitarian in terms of, you know, everyone had an opportunity to comment versus just the people that are okay with getting up in the room and screaming for half an hour. So I think there's some definite value to that process. But anyway, hopefully, I'm sure there'll be more discussions about that area.
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, yeah, there'll be more opportunities. And I think that presentation was recorded, so I think there might be an opportunity if anybody's interested in listening to that presentation and that session. I can check and see where that information lies and send out a link to it if anybody's interested in that. And then, as mentioned at the last month's meeting, you know, we're kind of at the very preliminary stages of. We've had some discussions with some potential applicants. And developers of the sugar mill property. And so as I mentioned last month, you know, that the commission would have an opportunity to weigh in because that property currently isn't in the sugar mill structures themselves, currently isn't within the city limits. And so they would have to go through what's called an annexation referral and annexation process, which has a lot of discretion in terms of what city can and cannot require in terms of annexation requirements. And so we certainly want the commission to weigh in during that time frame, assuming that, you know, those annexation steps move forward. And, you know, there was a party that's interested in looking at particularly the old sugar mill structures and see what opportunities there are for adaptive reuse of those structures as well. So fingers crossed, hopefully we'll continue to have those conversations about preservation of the sugar mill structures.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that'd be great to just have that link out there if it's available. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and unless there's anybody else that has something they want to put out there, we'll go ahead and close the comments from HPC. And I do not believe we have Councilman Rodriguez on with us. Is that correct? I don't see him.
I don't think so.
Okay. So we will have no comments from City Council representative. And so therefore we are at adjournment. Do I have a motion?
I will move to adjourn.
Okay. Move to adjourn from Commissioner Norton and seconded by Commissioner Hardees, and we'll just be rebels again and take a hand vote for this one. All in favor? Thank you. All right. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time and your comments and your participation. We'll see you in a month.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, actually,
Oh, yep.
sorry, I know that we've adjourned, so this is the wrong time to say it, but should we be meeting in person next month?
Well, I think we'll probably want to maybe revisit that
Okay.
next month in terms of what the commission's interests are. I know the city council is looking at going back to in-person meetings starting either later this month or in April. And I can chat with, I know other boards and commissions are, some are continuing to stay virtual. Some have discussed going back to in-person meetings. So, we can have that conversation about what the interest is on the commission, this particular commission, at least going forward.
No worries, and we are adjourned, so I apologize for.
That's all right. Well, we'll put that discussion on next month's agenda as to whether we want to move back to in person. It's a good question.